So I grew up on Marvel movies. Iron Man, the Avengers, the Guardians of the Galaxy, that all came out when I was in elementary school, all the way up until I was in college. The Marvel Cinematic Universe was basically my entire childhood. Marvel was something that I grew up on and something that I adored and loved watching. It was an event every single time I went to the movies. And especially leading all the way up to Endgame, all the different sequel teasers and how big of an event Endgame was. It was an amazing experience to watch. But now we're in the post-Endgame era, and I have to be honest, I just kind of stopped watching Marvel movies.
What? No, all right. I know that sounds bad.
Now, I should preface this by saying that I haven't stopped watching all Marvel movies. I saw all the ones that came out last year in 2022. I really enjoyed Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. I didn't like Thor: Love and Thunder as much. That one was pretty bad. But I loved Wakanda Forever. I think that ranks in my top 5 MCU movies. But when it comes to this year and the year 2023, when it comes to Marvel, I've just stopped watching basically anything they put out. I didn't go out to the theaters to watch Ant-Man Quantumania. I didn't like the previous Ant-Man and the Wasp movie, and nothing about this really intrigued me. And it felt more like an Iron Man 2 type situation where this was all just set up for the eventual Avengers Kang Dynasty and Secret Wars movie, which we're not even sure if Kang Dynasty is going to happen anymore. I did go out and watch Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 because I'm a huge fan of what James Gunn did with the Guardians of the Galaxy universe. And I want to touch on that a little bit more and why I watched that one and not the rest of the Marvel content that came out this year. Secret Invasion, I heard bad things. I didn't watch it. Loki Season 2, I wasn't that big a fan of the first season. I thought it was enjoyable, but definitely a lot of setup for the future of the multiverse saga, and I honestly didn't feel like watching it for the second go around. And this past weekend, the Marvels just came out with Captain Marvel, Monica Rambeau, and Miss Marvel, all starring in this movie. And I don't want to watch it. I think the trailers look kind of boring. I didn't watch Miss Marvel last year when it came out, so I don't feel like doing homework for this one. I wasn't a big fan of Captain Marvel that came out in 2019, so I said, you know what? I think I'll just skip out on this one. And this is something that's kind of becoming more regular with me in Marvel movies. I'm the type of person who likes to see every single new movie in theaters. I do get picky sometimes. Like there are some movies where I'll watch the trailer and say, no, I'm not gonna watch that because it looks bad or it doesn't look interesting. I'll watch a bad movie if it looks interesting, if it looks like it's gonna do something interesting that I can talk about. I think kind of why we've fallen off of the MCU is there's really nothing more to talk about with them. They're no longer these big events. I mean, they try to market them as events, but what they really are just set up for the next event. And this is a critique that's been thrown at Marvel since the beginning, that they're just setups for the next movies. And yeah, that's true. You know, you watch the movie, you wait until the end credits, and then you get a tease for whatever's coming next. But for the most part, they felt very self-sufficient. Like when I watched Captain America Winter Soldier and at the end they teased Wanda and Peter, Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch, I didn't really need to watch it in order to enjoy the next movie that was coming out the next year, Avengers Age of Ultron. It was just a cool little stinger, and their stingers used to leave more intrigue and more mystery. Nowadays, with the post-credit stingers for the Marvel movies, for example, Wakanda Forever, I really enjoyed. But the post-credit stinger for that one could have just been a part of the movie. Like, I feel like if you just walked out at the end credits, then you would have missed an essential scene in the movie, whereas Marvel movie end credit scenes used to set up movies, but they weren't essential to what you're currently watching. And I guess that's kind of why I've gotten tired of the Marvel Cinematic Universe as of lately. That's one of the many reasons that I'll get into. They feel like homework. They feel like if I don't watch this one, then I'm gonna get lost watching the next one. I've basically missed out on everything that has to do with Kang, bar Loki Season 1. I didn't watch Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, and I didn't watch Loki Season 2, so I have a feeling that once I go into Avengers Kang Dynasty, that I'm gonna feel left out because I didn't watch all the movies that set up Kang. Now, I also want to preface this by saying that we don't know if Avengers Kang Dynasty is gonna happen just because of all the controversy that's happened with Jonathan Majors. There's news that they're gonna either recast him or they're just gonna abandon Kang as a character and try to get a new villain for this multiverse saga. But let's say we live in a perfect universe where Jonathan Majors wasn't getting fired from the MCU, and he was a decent human being, and he was the next villain for the next Avengers movie. I just missed like 2/3 of the content that has to do with Kang in the MCU. Even talking about the Marvels that came out this past weekend, I didn't watch Miss Marvel. I wanted to. But the issue with that is that, for one, this has to do with streaming services as well as the MCU. But nowadays, media is just so oversaturated, and the MCU definitely falls victim into that. The MCU is releasing a million different things on Disney Plus that some of which I want to watch. Like, I watched all the shows that came out in 2021. I watched WandaVision, Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I watched Loki season 1, and I watched Hawkeye, all of which I enjoyed to different degrees. Then 2022 came around, and it felt like a lot. It felt like a lot of homework. It felt very overwhelming. So shows that I wanted to watch, like Moon Knight and Miss Marvel and She-Hulk, I just didn't bother. And I feel like the MCU is hitting us with so many movies and TV shows all at once, which doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. If you think about like Marvel Comics, they release a million different titles every year. And you don't have to follow all of them at once. You can pick and choose what you want to read. But my main issue with the MCU is it kind of feels like everything at some point is going to connect. And therefore, if you miss one thing, then you're missing out on a whole other event. Like I said, in order to watch the Marvels, I had to watch 2019's Captain Marvel, Miss Marvel. Some people say you have to watch Secret Invasion, some people don't. I have no interest in watching Secret Invasion beforehand. And for me, that just seems kind of overwhelming, especially I have a full-time job, I have a social life, and sometimes I don't have time to sit down and binge watch, 2, 3+ shows just to watch one movie. Sometimes I just want to go watch one movie and enjoy that single movie. And another thing about Marvel's oversaturation is that it's showing in the quality of their work. I feel like for the past 2 years, ever since the end of Phase 3 of the end of the Infinity Saga, Marvel movies just feel rushed. For one, in the production quality, their visual effects, there's multiple articles discussing the visual effects behind Marvel and how they mistreat their visual effects artists. I'm not going to delve too deep into that. You can go ahead and read about it online. It's a quick and easy Google search. Their visual effects are increasingly looking terrible and terrible. I mean, just looking at the trailers for Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, because I didn't see the movie, just all that CGI just looked weightless and it looked messy. Especially, I remember at the time when those trailers were coming out, they were also paired with the trailers for Avatar: The Way of Water, which is a visually astonishing movie and shows the power that CGI can have. And it seems like Marvel just kind of mismanages their CGI the majority of the time when they create these movies. And like I mentioned before, there's plenty of articles you can read where they just kind of rush through a lot of these projects, where they go on a script that's barely finished, they shoot the movie as quick as possible, and then they leave a lot of the work up to the VFX artist and say, hey, make a movie for us, make it all work. And they give them a bunch of notes. They want them to rework things like super last minute. And then they go back and they reshoot and they give them even more work. And it shows in the quality of the visual effects. I mean, look at the very first Iron Man movie that came out in 2008. I don't know why, but a lot of the visual effects in that movie look 10 times better than what's come out in their most recent films. Part of the rush nature of the MCU, it just shows in the script and a lot of the storytelling. I really enjoyed Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, which came out in 2022. I didn't enjoy as much Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Like, a lot of people love that movie. I wasn't a big fan of it. A big issue I have with both movies is that they basically lack a first act. Both movies just rush immediately into the action. They barely do any setup for any characters or any arcs. Actually, Shang-Chi leaves a lot of it to flashbacks, which I think if it was re-edited and recut, that could have made up the entirety of the first act. But they just feel this need to rush immediately into the superheroics and not really set up these characters in a meaningful way. And I'm also just starting to find these movies incredibly boring in terms of like their directions and their style. And this is something they do by choice. They want a certain homogeneity when it comes to the Marvel movies. For me, the best superhero movie to come out this year so far, probably my favorite movie of the year, is Across the Spider-Verse, because that movie just is imbued with style. And sure, it's animated and the MCU is live action, so there's going to be a difference in the way the visuals look, but just the attention to detail that the Across the Spider-Verse movies put into the filmmaking and the shots and like the production of it, like the way the whole movie looks, is astonishing. And then when I look at Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania or the Marvels, I mean, nothing about their compositions or their shots or their production really stands out to me. It all looks flat, it all looks dull, it all looks boring. And sure, this isn't the case for every Marvel movie. Like I said, Black Panther: Wakanda Forever was one of my favorite MCU movies, and that's mainly because Ryan Coogler's directional style really gets to shine there, and I really appreciate how much they just let loose in that movie. Same thing with Sam Raimi and the Multiverse of Madness. Multiverse of Madness is the MCU's camp horror movie, and it shows in like his Dutch angles, the way he moves his camera. It has a zombie Doctor Strange scene, which is incredible. Like the horror elements in that is just off the walls amazing. And even Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which came out this year, which is the only MCU piece of content that I've watched this year, is visually amazing. I mean, James Gunn, what I love about James Gunn's Guardians of the Galaxies is that they feel so separate and unique in the MCU. Like, they really allow him to go off in terms of like the visuals. I feel like he probably works really well with the visual effects team behind the scenes in the MCU, because there hasn't been a single visual effects shot in any of those movies that look off-putting, that look weird. All of them just look amazing, and even like the practical effects look great too. And also, what I love about the Guardians of the Galaxy series, and which I think a lot of the Marvel stuff needs to do from now on in order to stay kind of relevant and to still be popular and in the mainstream, is that they're just separate from the rest of the Marvel Universe. Yeah, they played a part in Infinity War and Endgame, and seeing them in those movies was awesome. But if you look at Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1 and Volume 2, and then Volume 3, they don't interact at all with any of the Avengers. The other Avengers don't cameo in their movies. The Guardians of the Galaxy movies are all kind of set in their own sub-universe. That means James Gunn has the freedom to make his own story, to have these complete character arcs for these characters, where you don't really need to do much homework for the previous movies. Sure, there's an exception to the rule with Gamora and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. You do need to watch the two Avengers movies where they fight Thanos. But even still, like, something about that third movie being separate from the rest of the MCU just makes it stand out in such a brilliant way and gives us this finality that we can't really see in the rest of the MCU, because everything's going to continue, everything's going to tie in together. But James Gunn was able to complete the arcs for Star-Lord, for Gamora, for Rocket Raccoon in such a beautiful way that I really admire and adore. Do I think the MCU is dead? Probably not. They have time to go back and fix their errors. Right now they're in the process of figuring out what to do with Jonathan Majors as the Kang. There's rumors going around that they're just going to ditch that character. And I think that's going to give them a lot of freedom and room in order to kind of rethink what they're doing with Phase 5 and 6 of the MCU. I'm hoping they kind of just bring in a lot of great directors and writers and let them do their own thing. One thing that gives me a lot of hope is the new Blade movie starring Mahershala Ali, which I was initially excited for because I love the Blade movies, and I love Mahershala Ali as an actor. Then I kind of lost excitement because there's a lot of production troubles behind it. But recently they announced that they're making the Blade movie for only $100 million, which I think is a brilliant idea. That kind of gives Marvel Studios the freedom to do something more risky with the property and with the character that I think can really pay off. Because if you're only making the movie for $100 million versus a typical $250 million budget, you can gain a lot more money based off that. There's less room for risk financially, but then you can take more risk creatively and artistically because you have a higher possibility of making all that money back. So I'm hoping they allow the director and the writers for Blade to kind of go off in the way like Guardians of the Galaxy did. Maybe it could be just like the Guardians of the Galaxy movies in that it's set in its own sub-universe, and it's vampires, and the whole gothic and dark elements of Blade don't really fit with like the whimsical Thor movies or Ant-Man movies. Really just make that its own thing, its own sub-universe. And sure, maybe Blade will show up in a Spider-Man movie or whatever, or they'll make a Midnight Suns. But if you can just really focus on making that its own thing, then I think that can be really brilliant. And the same goes for any other future Marvel things. I think the Black Panther movies are kind of following in the same path of the Guardians movies, even though it's tied in more with the Avengers stuff. I think it fits really well as its own sub-universe inside of the MCU. And especially with what Ryan Coogler is able to do, like with the filmmaking of those movies and with the scripts and how poignant his themes of like imperialism are in those movies. Like, I think he's making something really special within the MCU that's gonna stand the test of time once we look back on this franchise in like 50 years. But also, I think it'll be best and healthy for the MCU to lose a little bit of popularity within the movie industry. I mean, you've had people like Martin Scorsese come out and say that the Marvel movies aren't really cinema. And in some ways I have to agree with him. I don't agree with the way he phrased it, but I do agree that they take away a lot of the spotlight from new and arriving artists who could make movies on this scale or who could reach out to the audience that the Marvel movies kind of seem to take away. But I think, like Spielberg said many years ago, the superheroes will go the way of the Western, like how Westerns were very popular genre in the movie industry for quite a long time. But eventually they went away, and we see them pop up once every now and then. We still get Westerns, and a lot of them are great, but they're not as prevalent as they once were. And I think that's something that's going to be healthy for the movie industry. One thing that excites me is Barbie and Oppenheimer doing so great earlier this year in the summer. Seeing really creative directors go in there and do their own thing, and kind of like fight against the studio system, make movies that gross $1 billion and are made on a budgets of 100 million. I think are going to do wonders for the future of the movie industry. I could see like a similar collapse of what happened in the 70s with the movies happen nowadays, where, back in the 50s and the 60s, movie studios were focusing on putting out epics like Cleopatra, Ben-Hur, Lawrence of Arabia, and they got so expensive that they couldn't make any money back. And then in the 70s, what really flourished were the auteur-driven films, where they were more grounded and more gritty, and they were made on a smaller budget, and they focused more on character development, something like The Graduate or Bonnie and Clyde. I can see movies like that making a big comeback. I mean, you could argue that we did see that with Oppenheimer. I think Oppenheimer could be a very 70s-esque movie that focuses solely on character and less on scale. I mean, it's a Nolan movie, so of course it has a big scale, but in a very intimate way. But, I mean, I'm just not watching Marvel movies anymore. I guess I created this whole long ramble to say that I'm done watching Marvel movies. At least the ones that don't intrigue me. I'll watch Black Panther 3 if that ever comes out. Like I said, I'm intrigued to watch the new Blade. The next Avengers movie, I mean, it doesn't come out for another 2 or 3 years, but who knows? I might even skip out on that. And part of the inner child of me feels a little sad about that. But as an adult who's growing in the world and in his taste in film, that kind of excites me a little bit. I want to see how my taste continues to grow outside of the Marvel movies. And then someday I'll look back on them fondly and I would see how they kind of grew along with me. Let me know what you think of the newest Marvel movies in the comments. I didn't see the Marvels, but if you did, tell me why I should watch it in the comments, or why it was a great idea for me to skip it. But that's going to be all. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the movies. Peace out.